Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast with Barb and Tom. When God Gets Your Attention. The question for you and for all of us is basically think about when, where, and how God gets your attention. And we want you to be specifically focused on some of the signals that might just be everyday happenings, such as songs or signs or synchronicities. Sometimes you'll have strangers come by or situations, and every one of these is actually designed by Spirit, to get our attention and maybe have a reaction to those events. So with our podcast, we really have also looked at the themes of like, now what? After Spirit gets your attention, now what do you do? And last week we talked about surrender. And we also want to give you an overview of the other 5 categories. And they are the repurposing of life, the wake-up call, business as usual, just keep on going, a holding pattern where you don't really know exactly what to do yet, but something happened for you. And also there's the idea that there's the push off the cliff moment where things will never be the same. There's a major change. So anyway, we are going to be looking at situations today, and situations that might confirm for you that you're not here alone and there is a divine power that's working in our lives. Okay, Tom. Talk a little bit about a situation.
Hello. Good day, Barb. How are you?
I'm good. Got some exercise in earlier today. For all of our viewers who are in different parts of the country and the world, it's still 90 degrees here it's October 6th in our section of Arizona. So there's a little bit of sweat beads on my face, and that's sometimes, another sign from Spirit to maybe do some self-care and to slow down. So.
Absolutely. It's always good to take care of yourself. Self-care is so important. Body, mind, spirit. I mean, it's kind of what this whole podcast is about in a way, right? When God gets our attention, a lot of times we're not taking care of ourselves. So that's good. So today we're talking about situations, huh?
Yeah.
Which is one of our seven signals.
Yeah.
Small voice, situations, strangers, symptoms, songs, signs, and synchronicities. So situations, how often do we find ourselves in a situation? I think typically we think of like negative situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
the person on the gangster movie, that gets shot. God help me. Or the person in something really, really hairy, like a combat situation, or you're cornered in some way, and you ask God for a way out, right? But there's other situations that maybe are not so extreme where God might be trying to get our attention as well, right?
Yeah. And I think that, when we talk, sometimes like we say, like, remember how you're supposed to be when you're, practicing, like people who would go to church or temple or have religious practice, they're good when they're there in a certain space. But then when they go out into the world, it's sort of hard to live that message, to be kind, to treat other people the way you would want to be treated, to be looking at all of these other people that are human beings as God's children. So I know sometimes we've talked about getting in the car and being in traffic, or somebody cuts you off. And those are situations also where we have the opportunity to figure out how we're going to respond, you know. And you and a couple of the other people in our group, they know, like when I say, you know what, and I give you forewarning, I'll say, you know, I'm just cranky today. And it's just like sometimes we get in that mood where we're in a funk or we're cranky, and we really need something to redirect us. And sometimes that happens with situations that we're, you know, they're put in front of us for a reason.
Absolutely. And all of these 7 signals, they all overlap,
Right,
right?
right.
So situations can involve other things like strangers. Like at first when you were talking about how God puts people in front of us, um, sometimes we're faced with, could be somebody asking for a handout or somebody asking for help. How are we dealing with that? How would we deal with them if it was Sunday morning right after church? But how do we deal with that during the week when we're faced with that? Is that a reflection of ourselves on some level of where we could be if things were different? Um, are we kind to them? Are we loving to them? So many things that we could actually take away from that as well.
I know that you probably have situations from your work as, in EMT, driving the ambulance and, meeting different people who would be strangers who then, present to you with a situation that has to be addressed right away. Do you have anything you'd want to share with us about something that stands out to you?
Well, I mean, sometimes when you're working on somebody that's having a heart attack or what we would call a code, right? Where somebody is non-responsive. Obviously, that brings our own mortality right into focus, right? And so many times those people, they might already be dead. They might not really have a good shot at recovering. And so it can definitely make you think um, about that, but also just transporting people to the hospital. They're thinking about what's going on, and what's going on in my life. I'm sure it might be a wake up call for them on some level. um, I don't know. They don't always share about that when they're in that
Right.
situation. And
Right. But there's sometimes a
so,
takeaway moment for you too, because I know that sometimes we have people who, you know, it's not just somebody who's going to the hospital who is somebody who's, when you think of someone with a heart problem, you think of someone who's older. Even though last week I talked about my own situation with a stroke at 30. Um, Sometimes you have people who are in accidents and they're young, and or they have felt like the need to not be taking care of themselves on many levels. They might have some mental health issues. And so then you are present, and sometimes you have a chance to, God's using you. And that's how we have to look at some of these situations.
sure. And we can not only help other people when they're in a tough situation like that, especially a health situation or whatever that might be. But we might find ourselves in that situation. How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to respond? Are we going to respond with anger? Are we going to respond um, looking towards the light, looking to God, to spirit. Um, those are all the crossroads that we face, the situation that we're in. And really you can always respond in one of two ways, with fear or with love. And so that's what situations, they're big, they're huge, and that's why they're one of the seven S's that we have. I remember one of the situations we were talking about, what could be like the loss of a job, how that could affect us. And I know in the last couple of years with the COVID virus, you know, being so rampant and so much uncertainty, and what's going to happen with this virus, the economy. People did lose jobs, and found themselves out of work, found themselves closed up in their apartment, maybe not wanting to leave. And so I'm sure it would give definitely a lot of time for reflection, you know, reflecting on your life. Where are you going with this? Are you praying? Are you taking time to meditate? You know, all of these things, when, they're positive, how do we deal with this? Um, Again, do we look towards the light, or do we react with anger? And I think those are, for me, the key things. As you always like to say, take a pause, right? Do we take a pause, and then look at the direction that we go in, the positive direction? Look towards God. Um,
Yeah, no,
or do we
you're absolutely right.
instantly react?
The whole thing with the pandemic, I mean, no one thought it was going to be like a year and a half, 2 years. And what happens when you have something like a situation that sort of comes out of the blue? It's unexpected, unprecedented, and it affects you in ways where you don't sort of have control. You think you don't have choices, but you have so many people who repurpose themselves, which is one of the ways that we talk about as the what now. Repurposing was one of the ways that people would react. So there were situations where people were working in offices and then they decided to work for themselves, to start their business, to add to their business, to reach out to others. And I think that was all part of like a growing process also. And I think sometimes I know, like if I step back, I spent over 40 years in education, teaching teachers or teaching students, elementary students, middle school students. And I never knew, anybody who's a teacher, we don't know, even though we have plans and we're supposed to be planning ahead, you don't really know what's going to happen. And parents do this also, because you have to think on your feet. You don't know when a situation is going to happen. Like when my son went to go out to play when he was younger, and he hit his head on the monkey bars, and we're sitting at the dinner table, and all of a sudden, like, I pat his head and there's like blood on my hand. I'm like, what happened? And he didn't tell me that he, hit his head and that there was a nail that went into his head at the time, where there was like, so we had to go, we had to get, go to the hospital. He had to get a tetanus shot. But, these are situations where whatever you had planned for dinner, at that moment, the situation presented itself and you had to take care of it, And so then we had time together in the car. We went to the hospital, things worked out. And, my students, a couple of them were the ones who gave me information, who they would say, I would say, well, it's day by day. And then one of my students said, Dr. V, it's not day by day, it's minute by minute. And I was just taken. I said, well, tell me more about that. And she explained a situation that she was in, where as I think she was about 19. She just became an adult, and she went and she, filed with, the state to get legal custody of her younger siblings, her two sisters. And it was just amazing because at that point, everyone in the class, we just paused and we listened to what she was actually doing in her life, because she was led to take action, to make a change at that point. And not only did she repurpose her life, but she repurposed the lives of her sisters. And here she was going back for her degree when she was older, but she was insisting on the one who was college age to make sure that she was getting that education. She had to report back to her, with her the scores for courses and things like that. So I think that when we're in situations, there's an opportunity for us to get the lesson as well, and for others to also get the lesson. So what we want to ask the audience today is, what situation, if you can think of two situations that changed you, and two situations where you knew this wasn't your own doing.
And maybe, how did you react in those situations? Did you react positively? Did you react with faith? Or the one thing that kind of came up in my mind is, when we're in situations, there's a definite loss of control. When we find ourselves in a situation like losing a job, like having a new boss, being stuck out in the middle of nowhere,
Flat
your
tire.
car breaks down.
Yeah, right. And you should have gotten gas, and then you
and,
beat yourself
and your
up
phone
sometimes.
ran out of charge.
Oh, yeah.
And you're at the mercy of the kindness of strangers, and how do we deal with that? When you talked about minute by minute, the recovery programs would say 1 day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, or 1 minute at a time. And in those situations, it's a recommended thing that you turn over that control to God. You surrender and say, okay, this is out of my control. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to my higher power, to God, Spirit, whatever your religion or your spirituality that you refer to this being, angels, whomever. You give over that control, because if you're like me, maybe you'd like everybody to just line up behind you. I've got the ideas. I can do this. Just get on board. And I find that people usually don't. And so I'm not in control of everything. And especially the situations, they're usually maybe something little but that could be a big hassle. So anyhow, that's kind of what came to mind as well for me, is the control, the surrender. When you were talking about your student taking it, sometimes you got to just take it a minute at a time and be present. Okay, I'm here. Guide me, God. Show me the way.
I like
That kind of thing.
how you also had sort of like an affirmative prayer, because sometimes I know, like, if I run out of gas in the middle of a desert when I knew I should have gotten gas before I got on the road, I will tend to beat up myself. Okay. And that's not any kind of spiritual practice. If God loves me, he's not saying to me that I'm supposed to be judged of myself. And many of us out there, right? How many of you do that. You have that negative self-talk in your head that's going on, and you know that's not coming from God, because God is a loving God. But we do have that sense too, that going back to control, that many of us have a talk with God, and we'll say something like, we throw our hands up and we're sort of saying, I thought you were going to help me with this, or, where are you when I need you? And that's just us being, our human selves. Because then as soon as you step out into faith and you're calm and you've had a couple of breaths, you're going to see that license plate that says, it's okay, or I'm with you. Yesterday, I saw one at the doctor's office and it said, KP smiling. Keep smiling.
What was it?
KP smiling. Keep smiling.
Oh, nice.
And
Nice.
these are the positive confirmations that we need. And when situations present themselves, we have to do that pause and step back. And then once we do that, we can pivot into a different direction so that we're not, keeping up that crankiness that tends to, the crankiness will go on until we're in control of that too. I mean, we are in control to say, okay, I'm going to stop the crankiness. I'm enough now. I'm going to step out in a different format. So
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up, being good to ourselves too, because we have got to learn as, even really as a society, to be gentle with ourselves, be loving with ourselves, right? Everybody's going to forget to get gas once in a while, or do something, or neglect to do something that, that puts them in a situation. And beating up on yourself is the worst thing you can do. Obviously, that happened, and you're in that situation, and, you move forward, but or not. And if you don't, you're going to find yourself being a very, very miserable person in a bad situation. Or we can learn from it. We can learn how to deal with it in a positive manner. We can turn that control over, all of those things. So I love it. The self-care, the being gentle with ourselves.
because then
always-
when we redirect ourselves, then we could step out and we could be of service to others and help others, and we could also receive that message. Like that class, I remember it was a couple of years ago, and wow, did I need that student, and so did everybody else in the class, to be that honest with us, because we had no idea what she was going through and what she did in her life to make a difference with the people that were right in her own network. Sometimes we think we have to go, I have to go and do this program somewhere else, and it's right where we are that, God will get our attention right where we are. We don't have to go say, well, I'm going to go have this journey to some exotic location, because the lessons are put in front of us. Spirit knows what we need at the right time, and that it will have purpose for us. So anyway, I think we're ready to wrap up for today. And, next week, we will deal with, pose another question to everyone on another one of our S's. I think we might be talking about strangers next week, and the way that they come into our lives and change them for good. I mean, as they say in the Wicked song,
And we might possibly have a guest, possibly.
Well, we are lining. I have 4 people that want to come on to the podcast already, and so what we're trying to do is lead up to, to at least give a background to our, our 7 signals, and so we'll maybe talk about that. I'll see if the guest is available. Yeah. But also, like, I want to also talk about a situation yesterday. You know, I'm a big baseball fan, and I know we're both big sports fans, and Tom is from Wisconsin, and his team won the NBA championships in the summer. And now his team, the Milwaukee Brewers, right, Tom?
The Brewers.
They're
The
in the
Brewers are in
playoffs.
the playoffs.
Yeah, and last
Yes,
night, the
they are.
Yankees, where my family is from back east, they lost in a one-game playoff against the Red Sox. So if you're Red Sox Nation, woo-hoo for you. So you're going up against Tampa Bay Devil Rays. So anyway, you know, that's a situation too. There are people who have, you know, they play games, they play sports, and the outcome is not always, the situation doesn't always work their way. So that's part of lessons for us too. So.
Absolutely. How do we deal with that? You know, do we kick the dog and kick the kids? You know, I mean, it's something to consider.
And so Tom has worked everything out. So we have a YouTube channel, and we're getting our website up so that we'll have that available for people to say hello. And if you have ideas for us, please send them to us via email at barbandtom@whengodgetsYourAttention.com. And we hope your day is blessed and a winner. Tom, you have anything you want to say before we sign off?
Have a great day, everybody. Again, the choice is yours. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? But be gentle with yourself. Love others. Have a great day.
Okay.